Morning, folks. Welcome back. We're going to continue looking at our Unit 4. And going forward, what we're going to do this week, I'm going to do another video on Friday. And then on Monday, I'm going to introduce a project for you, a Unit 4 project. And I'm going to give you the majority of the week to work on that. So that's what we're going to do going forward. Just because this is the last unit. So we can spread it out a little bit longer. While that's still going on, though, please continue to send in your stuff from units previous, just so that, like I said, when it comes time to mark, I can give you the best mark possible going forward, and we can all be happy when June is all done with. Okay, so that's my brief introduction for the day. It looks really nice outside. Maybe a walk later might be a good idea. I think I might do that. Anyways, now you know my plans for the day. Anyways, let's move on. It's a short video today, mostly because there is a video I want you to watch that does take up it'll take up the time that I would have spent talking. But anyways, so we are talking about globalization and women today. So this is student activity 28. This is page 7 of your booklet. The reason this is so important is because one of two things. Either A, you are a woman, or B, you have people in your life who you love and care for who are women. That's what makes this section so important, is because it should be seen as something that impacts everybody. It's not just something for the women in our class to be paying attention to. The men in the room or in the virtual room need to be aware of this stuff as well. So we're going to start today on slide 3 with a 2-minute video on the double standards for men and women. This relates to clothing, so I'll let you watch that one without spoiling it too much for you. But I do want to say, and I'm going to say it, no, I'll say it later. I'll bring it up later about employment and clothing options. But we'll move on. So, globalization and women. First thing we must talk about is this idea of gender roles. So gender roles are the roles that genders play in society. So we're going to focus right now, though, on women's roles. So women's roles usually reflect the beliefs and values of their society. So gender roles, they vary depending on the place that they are, the country that, or the society that women find themselves in, or men find themselves in as well. For example, in Canada, gender roles are very different from, say, a place like Saudi Arabia was or is. An excellent example, and it is changing in Saudi Arabia, so we won't dwell on the ills going forward, but things like women were not allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia. Women were not allowed to leave the house without either the permission of a male or in the presence of a male. So obviously in Canada that's a little different, because women can drive, and women are allowed to leave the house whenever, without the direct permission from a male relative. So the roles of women vary depending on where they're from. Globalization may increase limits on women's rights when societies act to make sure gender roles do not change. So we live in a globalizing world where we are witnessing and we are becoming closer with people who are thousands of miles away. Those people start to see what others do. So let's use my example of Saudi Arabia, where women were not allowed to drive. They can obviously see women in other countries are allowed to drive. So they start to feel, well, why can't I? So then that creates a pushback on government policies on this specific law, and then there can be punishment if someone breaks this rule. So there are examples, and there have been examples in the past, where women had recorded themselves driving, and then when they were found, they are punished, and the punishments varied. Some severe, some not so severe. I would like to note that Saudi Arabia is changing its policy towards women in driving, and also women and not having to ask permission to leave. And they can even fly on their own as well. So they are changing, and we could argue that these changes are brought about because of globalization. They do change the way that certain regimes act. We saw that on Monday when we talked about the Hong Kong protest, for example. The Hong Kong protest is challenging the authoritarian style of government that the Chinese have. So we do see the effects of globalization challenging these old ideas of thinking. So gender roles are no different. Now, if we switch to this idea of gender in politics, we do see a slow shift. So very few women worldwide are involved in politics. So for example, 28% of Canada's House of Commons MPs are women, and 102 women were elected in 2018 in the U.S., a record number of 24%. So it's very small. Sticking in Canada, before the last provincial election, when we had Premier Rachel Notley, after she was voted out, and Jason Kenney took over as Premier, she was the last female Premier in Canada. So now all of the Premiers and the Prime Minister, they're all male. So it does show you that there is, it's sort of diminishing. However, outside of North America, things are looking a lot more positive. For example, for a very long time, I think maybe 2006, the leader of Germany, the German Chancellor, has been Angela Merkel, female, obviously. Where else? New Zealand has a very young and progressive prime minister. She's a female too. I forget her name. I read about an article about her in Time magazine. Very fascinating, and very much an advocate for the environment too. There have been many in South Africa actually too. 50% of the South African government is actually made up of women. So there is some progress. Those that are often in positions responsible for education, healthcare, and social welfare. So women have been given roles that have been related to those sort of fields. These fields have been dominated by women, and the males who do put them in these roles maybe perceive them to be better at them. I don't know. It could be a gendered idea that those sort of things relate to gender roles that were at one time, like 100 years ago. That's what women's responsibilities would have been, like in, say, the home. Maybe that sort of thing has bled into their consciousness. But we'll see. For those of you that follow U.S. politics, this year, 2020, is going to be a federal election. The Democrats are looking like they are going to nominate Joe Biden to be running for them, and Joe Biden has guaranteed that his vice president is going to be a woman. So, should he win, there would be a female vice president, and we'll see. We'll see how that turns out. So there is, again, a slow shift. So rarely do women have positions in defense, finance, or industry. Again, I feel like that's bleeding into the consciousness of government officials, viewing that maybe they don't think women could be responsible for those things. Again, unfortunate as it is. Women are seeking to gain a greater voice in politics through political campaigns and grassroots organizations. So these are community-based organizations working on local projects. These grassroots movements, yes, they sound very local, but they can explode into very large and global organizations. So again, like I said, it is a slow process, but it is a process that is changing. And in our lifetime, we will hopefully see a better future for women all over the world. Because um, if we limit ourselves to just focusing on what men can do, then we've cut our chances of developing things that could be life altering and changing the world by half. So it's we have to remember that to look at all things and all peoples, regardless of gender in this case. So, gender and employment. A lot of debate about the impact of globalization on women's labor. So, a lot of I show this video in my religion class. So if you were there, you would have seen it. A lot of the workforce of the world is actually women, and a lot of the poor in the world are actually women as well. So it does show you that there is an impact, and globalization has brought this impact as well. Some believe it has given women the opportunity to work in jobs that they would have not had otherwise. So yes, we do see things like in modern, in terms of globalization, when we talk about outsourcing and things like that to other countries, women do start to they have the opportunity to work. Yes, it's in sometimes slave-like conditions and working for next to no pay, but it is an opportunity to work. Now again, I'm not advocating for I don't agree with these sort of things, and we'll discuss this in this idea of employment. But I don't want to sound like I'm okay with the difference between genders and employment. I don't want to sound like that. So if I did, I apologize, but going forward, that's my stance. Others believe that the most work available to women, particularly in developing countries, is low skilled, low pay, and has poor working conditions. So I mentioned it, I believe, on Monday, or maybe it was last week. For those women that get tied up in the manufacturing of clothing in sweatshop conditions or almost sweatshop conditions, a lot of them don't have things like maternity leave. So if they do get pregnant and they have to miss work, there is a chance that they could just be fired and replaced by someone else. So they do lose that employment. So there is that sort of fear as well, which does create things like women giving birth and having to go back to work right away, which is extremely unhealthy for the woman and also for the child as well. So it puts women in this sort of position where they have really no choice. International efforts are also underway to involve women in entrepreneurship, starting their own businesses at the grassroots level. So I remember at the start of this year at our school, there was Women in Business, and it was a conference where female students from our school can go and listen to women who have done successful things in business. So there is this push to get these sort of things. And one thing I want to just address, and I addressed this in one of my religion classes, so if you were there, you would have heard this before. But I just wanted to just show you, and it relates to the video that you would have watched on slide 3, the double standard, and it all relates to employment. And we're just going to talk about clothing. So, how am I going to word this? We'll start like this. Women who get positions in businesses or companies, however you want to call it, we're just talking about clothing, because this is the sort of double standard that the video highlighted. They have to walk a very fine line, and this fine line exists where they are between two polar opposites. On the one side, if a woman dresses very conservatively, they show very little skin, limit the amount of makeup and jewelry, they're labeled as something. On the other side, if they show too much and they expose themselves, and then maybe they wear a little bit more makeup, they have more jewelry, then they're labeled something else. This middle ground of trying to walk between the two is extremely difficult. And I'll tell you this much. As a man, I've never had this problem. And I'm just going to speak very straightforward with you and very frankly. I've never been called a slut before by the clothing I've decided to wear. These are the sort of double standards that exist for women in employment situations and in workplaces. This gender double standard, it is a thing. And we won't even talk about the pay differences, because for some people they will argue it doesn't exist, but for others they will say that women make less money doing the same job as men. These sort of things are currently, they exist. So if you are curious, I can give you some information and some resources to look into that. But the idea of gender and employment, it is a very deep and complex thing. And the unfortunate thing is that a lot of us, a lot of you, will feel this, both either having this happen to you or knowing that it has happened to someone that you care about. That's why I'm telling you that this sort of idea of gender and globalization is an issue for all people, regardless of if you're male or if you're female. So please keep that in mind. So the last thing for today is on slide 7. It is a documentary. It's a 44-minute documentary. It's from the BBC. What stands in the way of women being equal to men? You will answer questions 13 to 31, so there is a lot of content in there, and I would strongly suggest that you watch it. Not only because you have to do the questions for it, excuse me, but also because it will bring stuff up that you may have never thought about, or you may have thought about it and felt that nobody else has the same concerns as you. So please give this a watch. That is it for today. Watch the video, answer the questions, continue working on your booklets, even past booklets. If you finish them, please send them in to me so I can mark them, because a lot of you I've seen your mark go up quite a lot since we left. Not saying that it wouldn't have when we were in class, but a lot of you have taken a very good initiative, and I'm really proud of you. For those of you that are slowly doing it, that's still great. For those of you that haven't, well, you wouldn't be watching this video, because if you were, then you would know about all this stuff. But I have reached out, and I will continue to do so. I'm not giving up, and I hope none of you have either. As I said, the last 2 videos, it still stands. If anyone wants a more personal one-on-one or a group chat to answer some questions, or if you need help with any of the projects or any sort of thing, please let me know and we can set that up. If not, that's it for today. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, and I will see you on Friday. So have a good day.